think we're live now. So welcome back, everybody. This is Darreck Kirby, aka DDP of the Dallas Prospect, joined by a special guest today, Ari Temkin, Phantom. Yeah, throw up the diamond. Yeah, yeah, man. So, today, well, let's just start off with pick 19, man. Leighton Vander Esch looks like that was the guy for Dallas. What are your thoughts on that? I know we had some opinions.
Look, I liked it. I think as it got closer to the draft, it was pretty obvious that's who the Cowboys were going to go with. They kind of fell in love with the kid.
Yeah.
And, I think he's got tremendous upside. That's been well documented. He only started 1 year. So I think that's a positive. A lot of people, you want to look for production and in a lot of ways, what you want to draft on is future potential. And this is a guy that has grown every year. He was at Boise. He's tremendous talent. I actually love the fact that he played 8-man football. I think it makes him more versatile. He's got more experience covering guys, having to do that at that level. I love the pick. I think you look at the amount of inside linebackers that went in the first round, and you see there's clearly that NFL decision makers think that's a major priority, and for the Cowboys to improve their front seven. I think they filled the need, and most importantly, Darreck, I'm the type of guy that says always take best available on your draft board. Mm-hmm. And according to the Cowboys, Stephen Jones said it last night in their press conference, he was the best available on their draft board. So, I definitely you can make an argument for Derwin James. I'd be cool with it.
Yeah.
But Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore, no, I think they made the right pick there, not going with a wide receiver.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wasn't looking for a wide receiver in round one anyway. I was afraid they were going to be a little reactionary to the Dez decision. I'm glad they weren't. That said, as you mentioned, Derwin James was there 2 picks earlier, and Dallas had expressed willingness to move up as high as 12 or 13 if they felt the right guy was there. Well, you had right in that range. I think Vita Vea went 11 right before Washington. By the way, I'm glad they didn't get him. He goes,
and they were going to take him.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 100% they were going to take him. I mean, they proved that with the next pick, taking the guy out of Alabama, De'Aaron Payne. They pair him 2 Alabama defensive tackles now. It's going to be hard to run on them. But that was my thinking. I didn't want them to go wide receiver, but I have some concerns with Vander Esch's neck, honestly. Like, I feel like a lot of teams moved him out of their first-round grade because of it. And I feel like it's a guy you could have had in round 2, so I would have rather gone with Harold Landry. That's who I really wanted, and somehow he still hasn't been picked up yet.
Yeah, but I agree. There's certainly a medical concern there. And look, when you're drafting football players, there's medical concerns. But I think the reason Landry slipped out of the first round was probably due to the same medical concerns. So, and who knows? Look, Landry was a beast 2 years ago and took a step back, regressed last year, but probably due to the injuries that he suffered. And I think there's really no other explanation for why he would slip out of the first round. This is a guy that was projected as a top 10 pick at a premium position. So, there's just no other explanation for Landry other than the medicals. And, look, he is an explosive edge rusher. We were talking a little bit earlier. I don't think you can't have too many explosive edge rushers. You just need a lot of guys and coming in waves to rush the passer.
Yeah.
But the Cowboys have taken so many risks on pass rushers and defensive players, Jalen Smith, Randy Gregory, that I just don't think they were in a position to take a risk on an injury concerned guy like Landry. But with what you were saying, Vander Esch has the neck issues.
Yeah.
But look, I think Vander Esch, his medicals probably check out a little bit better than Landry's.
Yeah, I feel like on that front, the injury front, usually they save that for round 2, right? How many guys in round 2 do we take who are coming off like a knee injury or something? We had Jalen Smith, Sean Lee, Bruce Carter. Now, Randy Gregory wasn't injury. He was, the drug problems and everything, failing the drug test at the combine. But it's a weird thing where they always reach round 2. So round 1, yeah, you're right. Round 1, they usually go with the sure thing. But even in that case, we still have the concerns on, Vander Esch's neck and everything. And he missed some time as a sophomore, I saw, which I don't even think he was really a real rotation player for Boise at the time, but he missed some time with a neck injury specifically. So it's not unheard of. I know he kind of suggested that it was nonsense that people just kind of tossed out there to hurt his draft stock, but it seems like there's at least something kind of valid to it.
Well, look, I agree with that. I'll just say this. I mean, no, he did miss time his sophomore year, and because they thought initially it was a concussion issue, and that was obviously a bigger concern. And then they found out it was actually nerves, or not nerves, but it was in the neck, and that was what was causing it. And then he came back and was very disruptive, and that led him into the success he had as a junior. I mean, he was just an absolute beast at Boise last year. I mean, there were games he had a 16 tackle game with 2 sacks. Another game. Against, I can't remember who it was, but like 13 tackles, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble. I mean, he's just a monster. And again, a guy that played 8-man football, we're going to hear a lot about that when it comes to him. But I mean, the strategy of the sport he was playing, or the 8-man football that he was playing, is conducive to not just playing up in the line of scrimmage, but backing away and playing in coverage, which, like, that's the modern day linebacker. And, we heard a lot about Roquan Smith. Obviously he went in the top 10, rightfully so. He was the best linebacker in this draft, maybe even the best defensive player in this draft. But I mean, his ability to go sideline to sideline, to play both, power game, as far as sticking his neck into the line of scrimmage, but then also back in coverage. I think obviously there are concerns about his strength, Leighton's strength at the point of attack. But I think, look, I mean, we'll see the toughness, but the ability to drop back in coverage as that guy. I mean, that's teams that get exploited in the the middle of the field, the passing game. They need linebackers that can cover, and I think that's why we saw 4 or 5 inside linebackers go off the board in the first round. And certainly Vander Esch is a project. He hasn't played as much football, but I think that works towards the Cowboys' advantage. They're getting a young player that's ready to learn, and it's about mileage. You don't want. The tight end that was drafted by Baltimore is like 25 years old. Calvin Ridley's like 21 years old. You don't want a lot of mileage on your football players. You want guys that haven't played a lot of snaps. And I think, production in college can sometimes be overrated from a standpoint of, now he's going to come into the Cowboys and he's going to get his production there, and that's where he'll get the miles and the toll will take on his body.
Yeah, no doubt. Age definitely factors in on that. I think Calvin Ridley's like 23, going to be 24 during the season. So it's definitely one of those situations where it's good to get a guy that's 21, 22. But I don't know. My only kind of reservations, the comp I was hearing the last couple days, I think it was from Marinelli even, saying they kind of see in Vander Esch a little bit of Brian Urlacher. I don't see that, like, in the film I've seen of it. And I'm not a huge film guy. I leave that usually to, like, Law and Big Game James. And neither of them are sold on it. We're all kind of, like, thinking the best, hoping the best. But it still, to me, feels a little bit like a reach. Like, if I'm going to take a first-round guy, I typically like to go with a guy that I know can come in and have an immediate impact. And maybe he can. But to me, Harold Landry made all the sense in the world. Now, he could be a good rotation player on an already stacked defensive line, but then you add in the contract situations of DeMarcus Lawrence, and
David Irving.
Exactly. You have basically your 1 and 2 options in that on that defensive line, both of which could be gone after next year because they're miles apart on a long-term extension with DeMarcus Lawrence right now, and understandably so. I mean, that's why I wanted them to franchise him, because I don't trust the back of a guy who had 2 back surgeries before he was 26. And, David Irving, he's basically like as rare a specimen as it gets. I basically call him a unicorn. And the fact that they're not willing to commit long-term to him tells me that there's got to be some kind of back-end behavioral issues or just stuff that we're not fully aware of. We saw his little drama blow up the other day. But I feel like there's got to be something there. There's some reason they're trying to get a highly motivated year out of him. And then I think they're going to go let someone else pay him next offseason. So that's why I liked Landry. You get his rookie year where he's the most raw and underutilized, I guess. You get that out of the way while they're still here to kind of help groom him and everything like that. But we'll see what happens in that regard. He could still be available, but I got to think him not going in the first round, like you said. He had some knee injuries. Or not, it wasn't knee injury. No, he missed some time last season. If you want to look at his last dynamite year, you'd have to look back to his junior year. So yeah, I don't know. I
and look, the Cowboys have 9 picks over the rest of the draft. I mean, so they have 2 4th-round picks, a couple of 6th-round picks. So maybe maybe they, I don't think they'll end up drafting 9 players. So I don't know if they're going to try to move up in the second round and maybe, take a pass at Landry. But I don't think they're going to end up drafting 10 overall players or 9 players over the next 2 days. So,
yeah.
But also there's been rumors. Mike Fisher from 105 to the Fan said they earmarked the 50th pick for Earl Thomas.
Yep.
Obviously, with the retirement now of Jason Witten, that throws a completely new wrinkle into the strategy going into today and tomorrow. So we haven't even talked about guard, interior lineman, probably left guard is probably still an area of need for the Cowboys.
Yeah.
So pass rush, tight end, they probably still need to take a flyer on a wide receiver at some point. And interior lineman, guard, left guard specifically.
Yep.
So they still have a lot of areas to address, and I'm sure a lot of Cowboy fans, and myself included, want to see them try to still make a play for Earl Thomas because he would be a perfect piece for that defense, a great leader, great guy to shore up. Certainly an area of concern for the Cowboys. Their secondary is great, but their safeties certainly are question marks. And you had a guy like Earl Thomas who has the experience and can really bring that, that young core in the secondary with Jordan Lewis and Chidobe and Woods, all those guys together like that. He seems like the perfect piece to add.
Yeah, definitely. Shout out in the comments to Cowboy fan Marquise, Dexter Green, Cowboy X Factor, Charles Edwards. Yeah, we got some nice comments rolling in here now. Yeah, it seems like there's some apprehension for sure on the Vander Esch pick, but a lot of discussion now with Jason Witten retiring today on what they're going to do there. As you mentioned, tight end certainly has to come into play now, and it sounds like Dallas was kind of blindsided by the decision on Witten's part. So if that's the case, then they're going to have to figure out. Now, the good thing is there are a lot of good tight ends left, obviously, in the draft. Only one got taken in the first round, I believe. And so you have a lot of guys that could make a contribution for them, but it's a lot of pass-catching guys. I don't know how many complete tight ends that you have there. So that'll be interesting to see. Is there a tight end in particular you have your eye on, maybe, if you're thinking second or third round?
Well, that's the issue, right? None of these guys are complete tight ends. Any of these guys are elite athletes. And they've been brought up where they're some of the best playmakers on their teams. I know you know Mark Andrews well from Oklahoma. He's a receiver for all intents and purposes and was an absolute beast for Oklahoma. He was, one of Baker Mayfield's top targets and was especially in the red zone. I don't know what his touchdown numbers were, but it seemed like the majority of the Oklahoma touchdowns this past year from Baker Mayfield were to Mark Andrews. There's Goddard out of South Dakota State, who is, 6'5", just unbelievable pass catching radius. Another tremendous athlete. But the problem is, the Cowboys. Jason Witten was a better blocker than he was a pass catcher, and he's 4th all time in receptions in NFL history. So, you're just not going to get anybody that at this stage of the draft is going to give you that all around ability to both be a great pass catcher and also a blocker, and more specifically be anything more than a pass catcher. So, I do wonder if that alters their strategy at all at 50. There are great athletes available and great tight ends on the board. But we were talking a little bit earlier, Darreck, and you've got Jeff Swain on the roster. You've got Jarwin on the roster. I know everybody loves Rico Gathers, but at this point, I think you can forget about Rico Gathers until he can play and get on an NFL field. There's still major question marks about whether or not he can actually do that. So, Jarwin and Swain seem to be the leaders in the clubhouse as both guys that are good blockers, but then they don't bring the versatility of being sort of multifaceted in that regard. And it shows you, again, just how valuable a guy like Witten has been for 15 years because he just has such an unbelievable ability to do both. Yeah. And he'll be remembered for his great pass catching abilities, but he was just an unbelievable stout blocker. Consistently one of the best at that position in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt he's a future Hall of Famer. There's no doubt he is. I basically call him like the modern day Mr. Cowboy, and I like you said, he was a great blocker, great pass catcher. I do think there has been a drop off in recent years with his performance. And I did take some kind of exception to him last year leading the NFL as far as tight ends, leading all NFL tight ends in number of snaps played last year. I wasn't crazy about that because his numbers were about middle of the pack despite being, pretty comfortably out in front of everyone else in terms of total snaps played. And I couldn't help but wonder, how how much development time are we missing out on? Not saying for Rico, because in Rico's case last year, it didn't even matter with his concussion and whiplash and all that. But for guys like Swaim or Jarwin, guys that could get on the field and could develop further, we don't really know what we have behind him. We've seen a little bit from Swaim. We haven't seen anything, as far as I know, from Jarwin in the regular season either. Obviously, Rico, we haven't seen anything yet. But it was interesting to me when Stephen Jones said this past week, I think it was, that how he ranked the top prospects for their tight ends. He listed Jarwin before he listed Rico, and the Rico was under the context of it's a work in progress. So if you're still saying that at this point, I mean, Rico's not a bust, right? They took a flyer on him with the 6th round. He's not a bust. Right. It was always a reach, but
Gavin Escobar is a bust. Yes. Rico Gathers was always going to be a project.
Yes, and Gavin Escobar kind of is a case that drives me crazy too, because that's a guy who they knew. I think he came from San Diego State. They knew he was a pass-catching tight end, not a good blocker. So they knew that, but they still took him. And then when they couldn't make him into a capable blocker, they basically just didn't play him. And so it's like you draft a guy knowing he's a one-trick pony, and then when he doesn't learn another trick, you just don't play him at all. And then, like you said, it's a 2nd-round pick, and it's a massive bust. You could have had like Le'Veon Bell at that same time. I think Bell went like a pick or two after Escobar did.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
Well, and I know Jesse Ortiz is saying JJ says it's not official. And what did you make of that? Like, Jerry came out and was basically like, no, we don't know. He's going to think about it through the weekend. Like, you don't get to decide that, Jerry. If the dude wants to retire, that's kind of his decision. I thought that was kind of, to me, it was almost like, let's just save this announcement for after the draft when we're no longer in the in the focal point, and that way because Jerry's about spreading out the headlines. Yeah. So they have the headlines now. They don't need the Witten talk now. They can spread it out.
Yeah. I mean, it's good, I think, in the sense that they know it now. I think it's good that they know it now, just in the sense that it gives them some chance still to draft a tight end. If he waited until after the draft to say this, it would be like all hell breaking loose. I mean,
totally.
We wouldn't have any plan set forth for the tight end other than like, well, we got the guys we got, and we're just going to have to roll with that.
Yeah, no, totally.
So I get it in that regard. I see Steven Adams talking about in the comments whether the Earl Thomas trade is pretty much dead now with the Witten retiring. I don't know that I would say that for sure. I still think Dallas, the draft is in Dallas, and while pick 1 wasn't the splash that I thought they needed to kind of win some of the fan base back after the Dez release, I still think they have a real chance to do that with the Earl Thomas trade. And we always knew it was going to be a day 2 move if they did it. It wasn't going to be a 1st-round pick. I think Seattle didn't. Now they do now, but they didn't have a 2 or a 3. But they traded yesterday and got a 3rd-round pick. So now Dallas could still get away with giving up only a 3, or at least the highest pick being a 3 for this year. But I'm not so confident in that anymore. I think it's going to take a 2 and maybe like something like a 2 and a 5th or something like that. But
it'll be interesting to see, Darreck. I mean, the answer to the question is no, it doesn't, because going back to what you said before, I mean, you draft a tight end in the 2nd round like Gavin Escobar. That's an athlete. That's a pass catcher. It's not a multifaceted and multidimensional player. So, and they can do the same thing here in the 2nd round, but they're not replacing Jason Witten with Mark Andrews. They're not replacing Jason Witten with a guy that's just an athlete that is I mean, these are guys, the 2nd round, 3rd round, that are some of the best offensive players on their teams. So, I mean, they were the number 1 receiver in most regards. Goddard's the same way at South Dakota State. So, and I think, the idea about, well, the Cowboys needed to draft a wide receiver to replace Dez, it kind of goes back to if you're supposed to be a good offensive football team, you just need a player that defenses have to scheme around every single week. Well, the Cowboys have that player. It's Zeke Elliott. So you don't have to have a number 1 wideout as a deep threat when you've got a guy like Zeke Elliott that week after week after week defenses have to key in on where he is, because that's all it's about. It's about where are you going to win matchups, and if they have to take a linebacker, bring him up to spy or to watch Zeke Elliott for the entire game. Now that opens up, Cole Beasley. I mean, that's what the name of the game is all about. It's finding areas where you get good, fortuitous one-on-one matchups, because a guy like Zeke Elliott brings so much attention to him. And that's, whether it's Julio Jones or in his prime it was Gronk, or Zeke or Gurley. Like that's how it works in the NFL. If you've got a guy, regardless of position, on the at a skill position that is a guy that defenses have to scheme around, then you've got your guy. And that's why I think the Cowboys didn't feel like they needed to go out and draft a legitimate number one wideout. And that's why I don't think the Cowboys feel like they have to grab a tight end at 50 either.
Yeah, no, they have options there for sure, and there's no reason that they should bend over backwards to take a tight end at 50. Personally, some of the guys I'd like to see 50 now, I should say really the guys I want them to consider in the second round, because some of these guys they would have to make a move up for. Aforementioned Harold Landry, I still would have interest in. I'd like to see Will Hernandez. I know he's from UTEP, but man, that dude's a mauler. Like, he's not Larry Allen, but there's enough there that you can kind of squint and see it. I mean, it's not even just against little schools, and that was kind of my issue with Vander Esch, is we only saw him in Mountain West, really. Now, he did play some opponents that were a little more noteworthy, but same thing with Hernandez going against Texas. He's still pancaking guys out there, so he's got something, and I feel like if you were to invest in Hernandez, then you're locking up the offensive line for years to come. Return instantly back to being the best offensive line in the league. Last year, it was kind of – I don't think it was like explored enough last year how much the offensive line was a problem for this team, especially in the second half of the season.
No question. Look, they're built on offense. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I think is important to note. Like, to win Super Bowls, you look back at most Super Bowl champs over the last 2 decades. They're either top 5 in offense or top 5 in defense. They're not top 5 in both. And the majority of those teams are top 5 in offense. So, like, the exceptions being the Broncos, a few years ago, they were number 1 in defense, and they were like middle of the pack in offense. But the majority of Super Bowl champions over the last 2 decades are top 5 in offense. Yep. And that's where the Cowboys are built. So you're right. I mean, guard to me is still where they should go at 50, and Will Hernandez is the guy that I think they should go after if they have to trade up to do it, because he solidifies the offensive line that, as you just said, Darreck, was not as good as it was last year. The year before, it was the best offensive line in football 2 years ago, and their offense was the best in the NFL because of it. So, look, they still have major question marks, obviously, from that line. They had to recalibrate, and everybody thought, well, you lose Doug Free, but you'll just kick Lyle Collins out to tackle, and then you can move somebody else into guard to replace Ronald Leary. But obviously last year they didn't replace Ronald Leary well enough. They didn't replace Doug Free well enough. And I think Collins is the answer long-term at right tackle, and I think even more so because if Tyron Smith's back doesn't hold up, you might even have to move Lyle to left tackle, because I think that's you just have to solidify that position if you just don't want to go with a swing tackle again at left tackle if Tyron Collins can't stand up, or Tyron Smith can't stand up. So Tyron Collins. So I'm with you on guard. To me, I still think at 50, that's where you go. And in fact, I thought they should have gone guard potentially at 19. But that the way the draft fell with Hernandez still being there, maybe they can move up. To me, if they move up in the second round, it would be to draft Will Hernandez and not to draft Harold Landry. But I mean, I wouldn't be upset as a Cowboy fan if they did that. But Hernandez is there. James Daniels, I know he was a center at Iowa, but I mean, I think he's a guy that can play guard. Mm-hmm. Interior offensive linemen, I think was the positional group in this draft with the most depth. And that's where the Cowboys really need to solidify and get back to being the best offensive line in football with the best running back in football.
Yeah, 14, 15, 16, they were the best offensive line in football. You didn't see it in 15 necessarily because of how many injuries Dallas had, particularly at quarterback and Dez. But it was the best offensive line for 3 years. Then last season you saw a 40% change in it with Leary leaving and Doug Free retiring. So even though you got a better athlete out there in Lyle Collins, he was really raw to start the year, starting at right tackle. I think now they seem like they're comfortable enough to leave him there, even though I like Fleming a lot. They're going to keep Fleming as the swing tackle, keep Lyle where he is, it sounds like, instead of moving him back to left guard where he was just bruising up people as well. So they're basically approaching it from the depth thing. They got to do something with guard. So Hernandez would be perfect, or, the guy you mentioned would also be interesting. So we'll see. But if Dallas is looking receiver at 50, it's seeming more and more like they're looking Cortland Sutton, and I'm not crazy about that one either. I know he has the highest ceiling probably of the Dez build guys that are still left, but I also feel like he's the most raw, and if I'm looking rounds 1, 2, 3, I'm looking for, if not starters, significant role players, and I'm not necessarily looking for raw, have to work with them 2 to 3 years just to see like real dividends in their game.
No, I agree, and I mean I think there's depth at that position too. I mean James Washington from Oklahoma State's a guy that I think he'd be available beyond Sutton.
Mm-hmm.
Christian Kirk. Kirk is the best to me of the guys left. I love Christian Kirk. In fact, I probably like Christian Kirk more than I like Calvin Ridley. So, I agree. I think depending on how the second round falls, if the Cowboys want to move up, interior offensive line is a position I think they need to address, and that's probably the top of the hierarchy because again, you need to have the best offensive line in football because you need this Cowboys team to be number 1 or number 2 in offense because their defense it'll be good, but it won't be top 5 good. Yeah. So if they're going to win a Super Bowl or compete for the division, they're going to have one of the best offenses in football. So I think interior offensive line is where they go. And even tight end, again, this goes back to, are they going to have playmakers? It's not just about what position, but it's, they need more playmakers beyond Allen Hurns and Cole Beasley and Ryan Switzer and what they have in the receiving core. So, I think tight end, wide receiver is kind of in the same ilk when it comes to guys that can go out and catch the football and make plays for you down the field for Dak. And again, still with the pass rusher, they still need to address that for the reasons you brought up. So they have, and I don't think they're going to end up taking 9 players over the next 2 days. I think they're going to move up at some point, whether that's the second round or third round or fourth round. I do think they're going to end up packaging some of the picks they have in order to move up to get out and move on a guy that they want.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned Christian Kirk. Do you see a problem with him being primarily a slot guy? I know there's some thinking that he can play outside as well. But, you already have Beasley, Ryan Switzer, and last year you had Allen Hurns playing 73% of his snaps in Jacksonville out of the slot. Now, we know he can play outside, and he's going to have to now with Dez gone especially. But do you think another primary slot guy would be a better move than a guy like DJ Chark maybe?
Right. Chark's the guy I forgot to mention. That's a good point. I forgot about Chark. Also, Deontay Thompson. I mean, he's a slot receiver too. So. Yep. Right. They don't really have room for another slot guy. So now it kind of comes back to, I wonder if they'll run instead of tight ends, they'll do some mixing and matching. Maybe they'll go with an extra lineman on some plays. Maybe they'll go with two slot receivers with Switzer and Cole Beasley at the same time. So it'll be interesting to see how Jason Garrett and Scott Linehan, the ultra conservative play caller and head coach, kind of mix in with the different pieces they have and personnel that they have to best utilize. But no, I mean, Chark is fantastic. And look, Sutton's an outside guy too. I mean, he compares to an Alshon Jeffrey, kind of just big body, lanky, can go up and make a play on the football. So, and I know the Cowboys love Sutton kind of in the same way they liked Vander Esch. So you might be unhappy with their second round pick too, Kirby.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, Sutton, he's got a high ceiling. I see it. But we're talking about a guy. I think the game that broke me on Sutton as far as being a first or second round guy, maybe this is looking too surface level, but the only real defense I felt like he played last year was TCU, the Horned Frogs. And in that game, he was held 1 target, no catches. And that just really stood out to me as like, man, you can beat up on UNT and North Texas. You can beat up on teams like that all day. But if you face real competition and you can't even get a catch, that's really troubling. Now, I know he had hot garbage for a quarterback as far as the play sometimes, but it still doesn't to me translate to, okay, that's a second round talent, especially when we're talking about how raw he is as a route runner. Like that's the other thing that just doesn't make sense to me. If a guy's that raw and he's going to be a project, it could work out in the end, but to me, I'm looking at this thinking with this identity built around this offensive line and, having like Dak and Zeke on rookie contracts when you don't have to pay them outrageous money, your window is like 2 to 3 years. And it doesn't make sense to bank on a new number 1 receiver that's going to take 2 to 3 years to show up and actually be a lead weapon on this offense, I guess.
No, true. And I mean, another comp I've heard is Laquan Treadwell. And I mean, he was a guy that was just a beast, made some ridiculous catches at Mississippi, but obviously has not really done much, has been with the Vikings. So, look, I think the Cowboys have options. My priority would be interior line at 50, but I also think, and I see some of the comments mentioning this, Mike Fisher from 105 Through the Fan reporting earlier this morning that the Cowboys, had the 50th pick earmarked for Earl Thomas. And, again, with Witten retiring, they only have one player over the age of 30 on their roster. So they're young, and adding a guy like Earl Thomas, a veteran presence, I think would be a productive move for them. But, I almost think if they have the opportunity to go for Will Hernandez, I'd almost prefer him over Earl Thomas, which might sound crazy, but I just think the need at interior line is that important, and that that's a guy that's a beast that's there for the taking for them.
Yeah, no doubt. And Earl Thomas, if they were to make a move for him, that's going to win back a fair portion of the fan base. And if we're talking with a 2 to 3 year window, he makes all the sense in the world to be the guy they go get, as opposed to there are other quality safeties that I'm interested in. I really wanted Derwin, but when they weren't willing to move up 2 spots to take him, to me that made me think that okay, they're this sure about Earl Thomas. But now that kind of got turned on its head a little bit, perhaps with the addition of the Witten thing as well. Not saying guaranteed they go tight end in the second, but it's at least one more thing they have to consider now. And we know how many other things we've listed off saying, oh, they could really use this, a couple of these. Hell, they could use another linebacker even. So it's all a toss-up, and that's half the fun of the NFL draft is there's no across-the-board perfect team. Everyone needs something or has something that they need. So
no question.
It's the ultimate chess match. But
no question, brother.
So what do you have in mind as far as what to look out for tonight and kind of this weekend as a whole? Any particular targets or diamonds in the rough, so to speak?
No, I mean, again, I don't think they end up with 9 players with their 9 picks. I think they will be active with them. And that's the luxury they've had over playing the game they played with allowing guys to leave and then getting compensatory picks as compensation. So, no, I mean, look, I think the Cowboys in years past, I think they haven't stuck true to their board, and maybe they've gone for need over drafting best available. And I think in round 1, at least that's what Stephen Jones said, they did best available on their board. And I think as a fan, or if you're analyzing the team, that's what you want. You want your team, regardless of positional need, to go for the best available player on their board. So you hope the Cowboys do the same thing in the subsequent days here in the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get out of here, I want to take 2-3 questions from the chat real quick. So I just posted that out to them, just kind of open it up, get it a neutral thing here, so it's not just like cherry picking something else from higher in the stream or in the chat stream. Let's see here. Big Texas, he's talking about if they have he has a feeling basically that they're going to make the blockbuster trade. I think so. I think that Earl Thomas is going to. I think it's almost like a necessary thing to do it. The draft is in Dallas. Jerry, between the Dez move, regardless of where you fall on that, from a business sense, I get it. From an emotional sense, I get why it sucks and why it was a hard thing. But it's one of those things where between that and then the underwhelming Vander Esch pick, even though that could be a very sensible pick, if I'm wrong on that, I will gladly admit I'm wrong on that. I will eat my words happily. But I think it feels like that. The draft's in Dallas. They got to make some kind of splash, right?
Well, that's the Jerry Cowboys we know and love, but they haven't been those Jerry Cowboys in a long time, right? I mean, they haven't been them. I mean, Steven's the opposite of Jerry. So the Flash Cowboys, I certainly in the back of my mind, I have that there, but we'll see. Look, I think Earl Thomas wants to be with the Cowboys. He's already said he's going to hold out with Seattle. So even if they don't make a play for him now, the longer this goes to training camp, if he does hold out, then Seattle at some point is going to trade him. And so it's kind of up to the Cowboys to think: do we pull the trigger now on a deal where we might be giving up more just to do it now, or do we play poker a little bit and let this thing wait out and see what happens? But I do think Earl Thomas ends up playing for the Cowboys, and that's because he said he was going to hold out, and if he holds out and he's not at training camp and he wants a long-term deal, and Seattle eventually is going to move him. So again, I don't want to give a percentage on it, but I do think that by August, September, as we move to the beginning of the season and the training camp, that Earl Thomas will be with the Dallas Cowboys.
Agree 100%. So Dexter Green, there's your answer. Dallas, we think will end up getting Earl Thomas. Brad Baker, how does the Witten retirement affect having enough money for Earl Thomas? Well, Witten was on a, I think, 4-year, $16 million deal. Now, I'm quoting that from memory. I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure he had no guaranteed money, although they did just restructure his contract, which means it's almost like so he'll get, because of the restructure, he'll get some essentially guaranteed money out of it. And it's interesting that right after he restructures, he decides to retire. So it's almost like a nice send-off for him, I guess, in that regard. I don't think it has a huge bearing on the Earl Thomas thing because, like I said, they already restructured him. So the money that was going to allocate towards him, the guaranteed money, that's already accounted for. So the numbers don't really change in any significant way for him. We're talking at most $4 million, but then you factor in the restructure thing, which will have to be paid. I don't think it has a significant impact. I think the Dez thing was a much bigger impact on the Earl Thomas thing because that freed up $8 million there. So good question there, Brad. Let's see. Is there a particular Texas player? We got Jesse Ortiz again with the question. Is there a particular Texas player you like between Connor, Malik, or DeShaun Elliott? So Malik Jefferson.
Probably Connor Williams. It's weird. The Texas Longhorns have seen a bunch of guys slip, in recent years. It seems like, this end of the Mac Brown, post-Mac Brown era, they've just had a lot of talented players that continue to slip in the draft and outperform their value. Jefferson's interesting to me because he's got so much talent, ability. You almost think he's like a Jordan Hicks kind of guy, but Hicks was injured so often in college. I think that's why he didn't get his true value in the draft. I'll say Connor Williams. He's the safer guy to be the better pick, but Malik Jefferson is a playmaker. There was just obviously questions about his ability to shed blockers and that sort of thing. But I think Williams will be the first guy off the board from the Texas Longhorns.
Of the three, I think I'm most curious about DeShaun Elliott. Just if we're talking now this would be in the circumstances in which the Earl Thomas thing, for whatever reason, doesn't come together. Then I think a DeShaun Elliott could make a lot of sense. He's a little raw too. I know Big Game James thinks he's a little tight in the hips. Our other contributor for the Dallas Prospect, who's a Longhorn guy, Cedric Morrison, doesn't agree with that. But I would have interest in him if they went with of those three. If they went with the safety, I think that would be my bet. Although I do like Malik Jefferson a lot too, and Williams is also very strong. So three very good players there. Let's see. Are you looking at the chat thing here? See if you had a particular question you wanted to grab out.
Oh, no, I didn't actually turn it off. Sorry.
Okay, no, you're good. You're good. Let's see. Who do we think will replace Witten? So I think Jeff Swaim, if Witten's retired, and Witten's all-time great. We said that already. If Witten's really retired, I think Swaim has the inside leverage on that. I think he's the most complete of the three, which is not to say that he's super complete. I think Jarwin is another good pass catcher. Yeah. Rico has the highest ceiling, but Rico, I think with him, there's a difficulty he's experienced thus far with both with blocking and with kind of learning the playbook and really understanding the ins and outs of the game. But when you're talking about a guy who didn't play in college, that's kind of understandable.
No, I think at this point, he's 2 years into this project. This will be year 3. Mm-hmm. Anything you'd get from him, you should be shocked. Honestly, I just wouldn't count on him. I know he's like a fan favorite. He's like a legendary status, but I think the guy is Swaim. He's already proven himself as a blocker. The only question about Swaim, if we're talking about former Texas Longhorns, is his ability to stay on the field. He's obviously had injury concerns throughout the course of his career. So I just don't feel good about where the Cowboys are positionally with tight end. So maybe that's why they feel a greater need at 50 to jump up and maybe get an elite kind of pass catcher at that spot. But don't go get Gavin Escobar. Don't go drafting a guy in the second round who's got elite physical abilities as a pass catcher that you want to turn into a blocker. It's just not how it works. And most of these guys, the majority of these guys you're drafting at the tight end position are just great receivers that need to be developed into blocking tight ends. So.
first season that I looked at Mark Andrews and thought he had more the build for the position. Before, it was kind of like, yeah, we lined him up as a tight end, but he was still kind of the build of a wide receiver. So it didn't necessarily translate as well. He's not a strong blocker, but if you're willing to be patient, then that's not a bad pick. I don't know if I like it in round 2. If he's there in 3, maybe that's a route to go. But anyway, I'm very interested to see how the draft plays out tonight and really the rest of the weekend too. A lot of opportunities for him. I agree. I don't think they're taking 9 players. I think they're gonna maybe take like 7, make a deal or 2.
Should be fun, brother. I appreciate having me on. Let's do this again soon.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for coming on. And everyone, thanks for coming into the chat here, talking with all you. We'll do this again soon. Thank you again, Ari, for coming on.
Take care, Darreck. Later, brother.
Later, man.